And welcome back to more right here on Herbally Yours at the voice of Nassau Community College. Our guest today is Dr. Laurie Nadel, author of many books. Her beautiful new book, The 5 Gifts, Discovering Hope, Healing, and Strength When Disaster Strikes, with a foreword by Dan Rather. Thank you so much for being our guest today, Dr. Laurie.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Now, the 5 gifts, they are
humility, patience, empathy, forgiveness, and growth.
What made you develop those specific 5?
Well, I was having a very difficult time. One of the things that you discover, if you don't already know it, if you've been through a natural disaster, then you know that the process of getting your insurance settlements and dealing with the banks and the governments and contractors and vendors, you can deal with a lot of lies and harassment and betrayal and being accused of things that you haven't done. And I was accused of having abandoned my home, so they were going to cancel my insurance, and that was so upsetting for me on top of everything else that I decided to shut everything down for 48 hours and meditate. And while I was meditating, I heard my inner voice or my guides or some source of creativity and wisdom that's far more knowledgeable than my conscious self whispered these 5 words, which were humility, patience, empathy, forgiveness, and growth. And this inner voice said, write them down, and these 5 gifts will help you to heal and to shift and to recover, and you can share them with other people. And so I wrote them down, and when I went back to writing the proposal, I recognized that these 5 gifts were really going to be much more substantive than the book that I had originally envisioned, which was really more about the projections of what was going to happen if we didn't listen to nature. Now, the 5 gifts encompass all kinds of traumatic events, not just climate change events. And
right.
So they came to me through meditation.
More wide-ranging. So humility, patience, empathy, forgiveness, and growth. And then you found that in the scientific literature, there was lots of support for these being very effective steps.
Yes, I started writing, and I call them the 5 Unbearable Gifts, which is a title that Buddhist monks love and publishers hate, because they say, well, if they're unbearable, nobody's going to want them. And I said, yes, that's the point. We don't want them until we absolutely need them. And so with these 5 gifts, I started to write. I started to work with people. I was running 2 support groups on the Barrier Island for people who had both initial trauma and then started to develop anxiety, or what I call hurricane phobias. As the next 2 hurricane seasons kind of came around, and people were freaking out and getting very disturbed. So I was able to use these 5 gifts to help people through that longer period of healing and stabilization.
And in your book, The 5 Gifts, you discuss each of these in detail and how they relate to individuals and how to, some of these things come very easily to some people and not others, like patience. Right. I know people who can just wait all day. Well, perhaps that's challenging for me since I'm an Aries and I'm a go-getter. And some people just, like whenever, So some people have these things naturally and some have to work on developing them.
That's absolutely true. And the science, and I started writing, I thought, well, these sound really good to me, but people are going to think I made them up. And even though they came to me, kind of intuitively from a spiritual source, when I started doing research, I found that there was behavioral research, scientific and psychological research on the positive power and benefits of each one of these 5 gifts. So at the end of each of the chapters, I have 5 minutes, a 5-minute way to capture, if you will, or to access each of the 5 gifts, because people, especially when you're recovering from a trauma, it's really hard. You can't sit there for 20 minutes and focus. If you're lucky, you can do 3 to 5 minutes, and you need techniques that are going to kind of help take the edge off or help stabilize you very quickly. And so those tips: 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day to humility, to patience, to empathy, forgiveness, and growth. That's in each of the chapters on each of the 5 gifts.
And you talk about bringing down anxiety by rephrasing. For instance, you're looking at something where people might have difficulty sleeping, and you have these beautiful lock and key illustrations. So if you have going around in your mind, what if I can't sleep? You repurpose that statement into how many hours of sleep do I need to function. So even if you did get, 2 or 3 hours, and instead of worrying about, well, I didn't get 7 because I'm still so upset.
Yes, sleep is really important. Sleep and drinking enough water, and getting a balance of rest and exercise. And this is all part of the emotional first aid program that we keep reinforcing to fire department personnel and to paramedics and people who are on the front lines. That this is basic self-care. And I had studied clinical training in mind-body medicine with Dr. Herbert Benson, what used to be the Harvard Medical School Institute of Mind-Body Medicine. And the sleep, the module on sleep, looked at a lot of cognitive reframing or restructuring, what they called NSTs, which are negative sleep thoughts. And when we're very stressed and we can't sleep, and it goes on for more than 1 or 2 nights, we start to get into the cycle of negative sleep thoughts. I can't sleep. I can never sleep. I'm always going to have these problems. And so, looking at the language that you're using and rephrasing and repurposing your statements about sleep will also help to release some of the anxiety that comes up around what happens if I can't sleep.
Well, I would like our listeners to know that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamai, and my guest today is Dr. Laurie Nadel. You can find her at Laurie, that's Laurie, Nadel, Nadel, LaurieNadel.com, and we're talking about her wonderful book, The 5 Gifts, Discovering Hope, Healing, and Strength When Disaster Strikes. And that's great information about the various gifts. Of course, you do have to maybe get ready for storms. I love how you talk about think ahead of time, like what can you live without? For instance, what happens if the electricity goes out? I think all of us on Long Island have had that happen.
Right, we have had that happen. I think that power failures. We're so overly dependent on electricity, and I say that myself. It's very difficult to live without any electricity, in the sense that we're all we like getting our information. We like watching television. We need air conditioning if we have respiratory issues, or we want our automatic appliances to work. So it's important to really think ahead of a storm season. If it's whether it's a wildfire season, whether it's a monsoon season or hurricane season or blizzards.
How about volcanoes? That's today.
Right, and volcanoes. And how long could I make do without electricity? Do I have a plan in place? Where could I go? Sometimes some people have electricity and some people don't. So do I have friends who I can go to? Because if the electricity runs out, I think it's better to be with other people, sharing your food and sharing your water and sharing your resources, than being alone. And I also think that it's important to have a kind of get up and go kit available that includes things that are healthy for you, as well as some comfort food, as well as I talk about your psychological first aid kit. Make sure that you have a playlist of music that you like or videos that you like, but also bring books, because sometimes there is no cell phone service and there is no internet. So, be prepared to be able to read something that you like. I believe you can never have too many flashlights. Make sure that you have portable toilets. They have these things called rest stops, where sometimes, the sanitary facilities go out. When the storm surge blew out the town's sewer pump, there was no place, to use. There were no facilities. So, when we were up in the attic and we were waiting for the water to subside, if you had to do a call of nature, I didn't have emergency rest stops in my go kit, so it was a bit of a problem. I think you have to think ahead of, because we are all living in a time of turbulence right now, and anything could happen, but especially, climate change events are becoming more frequent and more severe.
It's true. And in your book, you have wonderful ways to really work on things ahead of time psychologically with your wonderful lock and key 5 minutes a day to each of the gifts.
Yes. Only 5 minutes a day. And I like things. I had a hard time writing the patience chapter because I realized as I was getting ready to write it that me writing about patience is like Taylor Swift writing a song about a relationship that ends happily ever after. And I am the least likely candidate to be writing about patience. So I like things that work quickly, because when you're when you're in shock or you're coming out of something traumatic, you need things that work quickly, because your attention span is going to be much shorter because you are in shock.
I also love, of course, your Appendix B, homeopathic remedies for acute stress. I think everyone should have this, and guess what? Get it now, because as we speak, the FDA is now pulling homeopathics off the market and not allowing them to be labeled in terms of what you might want to use them for.
I've studied, I have a postdoctoral diploma in clinical homeopathy from CEDH, which trains medical professionals. And although they probably will have some questions about some of the items I listed, because they normally are used in terms of chronic, kind of constitutional or overall mind-body balancing protocols, I think they work very well, and I found that all of these medicines that I've listed in the appendix are safe, natural, effective, and quick-acting to relieve specific anxiety triggers. There's one that you can use if you get anxious before storms. That's rhododendron. There's one that you can use if you get anxious during storms, and especially if you're afraid of thunder and lightning, and that's phosphorus. I have a lot of different remedies for sleep, and put your homeopathic first aid kit together, because it's good to have it on hand when things are breaking around you.
And by the way, they work for dogs too. I've used this one for phosphorus for dogs that are afraid of thunderstorms. So we have come to the end of our time together, Dr. Laurie, and thank you so much for sharing this book, The 5 Gifts, Discovering Hope, Healing, and Strength When Disaster Strikes.
Thank you so much. People can reach me on my website, which is laurienadel.com. And Ellen, I really appreciate your support and having me on the show. Please send me a link so I can tweet it and send it out to my network.
I will, and thank you for tuning into Herbal Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai, at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbal Yours. Until then, stay healthy.